The preface introduces the book Legislature by Lot Transformative Designs for Deliberative Governance as a product of the Real Utopias Project, edited by Erik Olin Wright. This project is founded on the idea of real utopias, utopian ideals that are grounded in the real potential for redesigning social institutions. The project embraces the tension between dreams and practice, believing that what is pragmatically possible is shaped by our visions. And the books in the series emerge from workshop conferences where scholars respond to provocative manuscripts. The content of the volume originated from a September 2017 Real Utopias Project conference. The subject of this conference was the idea of creating a legislative assembly in which the legislators are chosen through a civic lottery. The anchoring proposal part 1, the conference was centered on a specific proposal prepared by Gastil and Erik Olin Wright, along with a postscript by Wright. The proposal, titled Legislature by Lot, Envisioning Sortition Within a Bicameral System, argues for a bicameral legislature. This bicameral system would combine an electoral chamber where legislators are selected through elections with a chamber where members are chosen by random selection sortition. The opening essay lays out the central argument, which includes reviewing the democratic flaws intrinsic to electoral representation, setting out principles that should guide the construction of a sortition chamber, and arguing for the value of combining sortition and elections. Part I also includes Wright's postscript, the anti-capitalist argument for sortition. The response essays parts 2, 4, the subsequent chapters in the volume are responses presented by participants in the September 2017 conference to the central proposal. These responses are divided into 3 main sections. Contemporary context, these essays examine the proposal within its current political setting. Yves Saint-Omer provides a historical overview of sortition ideas in democratic theory and from deliberative to radical democracy, sortition and politics in the 21st century. James S. Fishkin explores the prospects and limits of using random assemblies for lawmaking and random assemblies for lawmaking, prospects and limits. He favors a more targeted use of sortition assemblies over a long-term, full-function sortition legislature. Tom Arnold, David M. Farrell, and Jane Sweeter share insights from a real-world example in Lessons from a Hybrid Sortition Chamber, the 2012 to 14 Irish Constitutional Convention. Pierre-Etienne Van Damme and co-authors explore public and political attitudes towards sortition in Belgium and intercameral relations in a bicameral elected and sortition legislature. Andrea Felicetti and Donatella Della Porta consider how a sortition chamber would relate to social movements in joining forces, the sortition chamber from a social movement perspective, democratic principles. This section focuses on the advantages and challenges posed by sortition in relation to core democratic principles. Tom Mallison compares electoral assemblies and sortition assemblies using a scorecard of democratic qualities in Should Democracy Work Through Elections or Sortition. Jane Mansbridge discusses the connection between representatives and citizens in accountability in the constituent-representative relationship. Lynn Carson addresses the practical elements needed for effective governance in how to ensure deliberation within a sortition chamber. Dimitri Courant analyzes sortition's distinctive qualities and non-obvious democratic virtues in sortition and democratic principles, a comparative analysis. Arash Abizadeh advocates for a blended approach in defense of imperfection and election sortition compromise. Alternative paths toward sortition, these essays examine different models for incorporating sortition. Devin Burks and Raphael Keyes suggest caution regarding rapid implementation in a gradualist path toward sortition. David Owen and Graham Smith discuss rotation and mandate limitations in sortition, rotation, and mandate conditions for political equality and deliberative reasoning, expressing skepticism about the viability of a full-function sortition legislature. Brett Hennig argues against the necessity of pairing sortition with an elected chamber in Who Needs Elections, accountability, equality, and legitimacy under sortition. Terrell Beretius argues strongly against hybrid bicameralism and why hybrid bicameralism is not right for sortition, favoring special-purpose sortition lawmaking bodies over a full-function sortition legislature. Conclusion: the volume concludes with reflections by Gastil and Wright, offering their perspectives informed by the response essays in the September 2017 conference in sortition scope, contextual variations, and transitions. They acknowledge the difficulties in designing a system separate from a specific socio-political context and the variety of transitions sortition could take, hoping the essays will clear the path for experimentation with this ancient method of democracy. Chapter 1, Legislature by Lot, Envisioning Sortition Within a Bicameral System, written by Gastil and Erik Olin Wright, presents the core proposal of the book, instituting a legislative chamber composed of randomly selected citizens to complement an existing elected body. The foundational idea is to establish a bicameral legislature composed of one chamber of elected representatives and a co-equal sortition assembly of randomly selected citizens. Both chambers would possess equal powers to initiate and vote on legislation passed by the other. The members of the sortition chamber would be well compensated, serve multi-year terms with staggered selection of new cohorts annually, and receive extensive training and professional support. The proposal is rooted in the tension inherent in democracy between the ideal that ordinary people should govern themselves and the practical reality where ruling is primarily delegated to elected political or bureaucratic elites. The authors review two categories of serious problems within conventional legislative elections: those related to the electoral process and those tied to the behavior of elected legislatures. Deficiencies documented globally include campaign finance issues, adverse candidate selection biases, and poor media coverage. The competitive nature of elections often attracts individuals driven by excessive ambition, ego, and stubbornness, discouraging many civic leaders from seeking office. These electoral pressures lead to issues such as corruption, lobbyist influence, and the subtle dispensing of favors. Legislative solutions are often limited by ideological commitments required for effective party membership, leading to unnecessary partisan blockages. This environment results in significant waste on political posturing and fundraising, and consequently, historic lows in public trust and legitimacy across OECD countries. Sortition addresses these democratic deficiencies by providing a direct expression of equality through each citizen's chance of selection. While elections embody government by the people, the electorate, Sortition advances government of the people, the randomly selected assembly. Pairing them ensures a measure of both. Sortition is argued to potentially yield better policy outcomes than elected bodies for three reasons. Sortition members are chosen without regard to wealth, eliminating the bias toward financial and class interests that electoral politics favors. Freed from re-election pressures and party discipline, a Sortition legislature is more likely to study problems with open minds and devise creative, non-conventional solutions. Random selection ensures demographic diversity, bringing a greater variety of experiences and perspectives to the table, which enhances deliberation and recognizes marginalized voices. The design must adhere to two sets of evaluative principles. Membership must be as representative of the citizenry as possible. Crucially, members must have an equally viable opportunity to serve, requiring protection against financial ruin or job loss related to the long-term commitment. The body should have the broadest possible scope for deliberation, authorized to influence the same issues as other comparable governing bodies. Each member must have an adequate and equal chance to express policy preferences and vote. The system must prevent the long-term concentration of power in a small subset of the legislature. There must be elaborate systems for staff and professional assistance, along with a fundamental training process for members unfamiliar with government operations. A reliable system is needed to gather, record, and respond to reflective public input, providing a surer conduit for public engagement than traditional methods. Mechanisms for internal oversight must be established to hold members accountable to one another and address misconduct like bribes, since electoral accountability is absent. The authors sketch out the specific contours of the design. Sampling should target the adult citizen population and be transparent. Disqualifications are uncontroversial. For example, current prison inmates. Legislators must be generously compensated, for example, equivalent to the elected chamber salary, to make service viable for all socioeconomic groups. The design eschews short duration, single issue approaches in favor of a single, ongoing assembly addressing a full range of complex issues. Training must be mandatory and paid. To filter out those seeking only the salary, Azapos offer a severance package for those who choose to withdraw early, is suggested. Key sessions of mandatory training should be open to public viewing, for example, live streaming, to showcase open-minded inquiry. Committee assignments should prioritize interest and ability over seniority. An oversight commission is needed to review the selection process and manage staff. The system must implement mechanisms for censure and expulsion, requiring a large supermajority vote, thereby serving as a replacement for electoral accountability. However, the authors explicitly state that traditional electoral mechanisms like recall should not be grafted onto the sortition chamber. The authors argue against eliminating elections entirely, contending that an optimal legislative design combines both mechanisms. They offer three primary justifications for retaining the elected chamber. Parties are necessary for articulating political programs, educating the public on alternatives, formulating visions for social change, and mobilizing collective action. They facilitate adversarial politics, which, at its best, drives legislative accomplishments by addressing constituent discontent. Given that some conflicts of interest cannot be resolved through disinterested deliberation, the elected chamber, with its political parties and authorized representatives, is better suited for the necessary bargaining and compromise required in politics. The combined system creates a virtuous dynamic where the sortition body provides deliberative problem solving, complementing the adversarial negotiation capabilities of the elected chamber. For the elected chamber, they recommend utilizing large, multi-member districts with ranked preference voting, where representatives' votes are weighted by the number of ballots they received, ensuring a tangible sense of direct representation by organized parties. The chapter concludes by introducing Erik Olin Wright's anti-capitalist argument, later expanded in Chapter 2. Wright suggests that sortition constitutes a non-reformist reform that challenges the capitalist state, since the existing democratic form, capitalist democracy, is designed to contain class struggles and protect capitalism, introducing legislative power wielded by ordinary citizens who can access sound information and deliberate will make the state structure more deeply democratic. Such a body would be more open to egalitarian reform, skeptical of elite arguments, and thus better capable of reforming and potentially transcending capitalism than an elected body. Chapter 2, Contemporary Context. Yves Sintemer opens the section by providing a broad historical overview of the role of sortition ideas in democratic theory. He differentiates two historical waves of modern political sortition experiments. First wave. This wave primarily consisted of top-down consultative mini-publics, such as citizen juries, consensus conferences, and deliberative polls, which emerged at the end of the 20th century. These were designed to complement representative democracy with a logic of deliberative democracy. They typically operated as one-shot events and produced non-binding advisory recommendations, sometimes acting like carefully designed and closely monitored protected designations of origin (PDO). Sintemer argues that this first wave differs significantly from the radical Athenian democratic traditions because it relied on the modern concept of the representative sample rather than the concept of self-government where all citizens could hold office. Second wave. This wave is characterized by being more plural, inventive, and often bottom-up. These newer experiments, including the Icelandic and Irish citizens' assemblies, have frequently been empowered with links to real decision-making, such as coupling deliberative democracy with direct or participatory democracy. Sintemer claims that these empowered sortition processes better capture the spirit of radical Athenian democratic traditions than the purely consultative mini-publics of the first wave. Sintemer argues that a proposal for a legislature by lot should rely on the lessons of this second wave and can be a crucial dimension for a radical democratization of democracy. James S. Fishkin draws on his extensive experience designing and using deliberative mini-publics to examine the role of randomly selected bodies in lawmaking. Fishkin voices skepticism about establishing a long-term, full-function sortition legislature, arguing that such a body faces serious challenges, including vulnerability to corruption due to the extended period of service and difficulties in maintaining the conditions for high-quality deliberation over years rather than days. He argues in favor of a more targeted use of sortition assemblies like the deliberative poll model convened for short periods. These short convenings, if institutionalized, could provide a valuable deliberative input into lawmaking. Drawing inspiration from ancient Athenian institutions like the Boole Council of 500 and the Nomethet AI legislative boards, Fishkin sketches three modern scenarios for institutionalizing these bodies as filters. Pre-filter, a deliberating microcosm, precedes legislative decisions, for example, Mongolia's law requiring a deliberative poll before constitutional amendments. Post-filter, a microcosm follows legislative decisions, for example, a modern application of the Nomethet AI to approve legislation. Deliberative agenda setting for ballot propositions. A microcosm sets the agenda for initiatives before they go to a mass vote. This chapter offers a real-world case study of a hybrid sortition body, the 2012-14 Irish Constitutional Convention. The convention was a hybrid sortition chamber that seated randomly selected citizens alongside public officials, members of parliament. Its creation was part of a political reform push following the Great Recession. It was tasked with reviewing specific constitutional issues such as marriage equality, blasphemy, and Dow Parliament electoral reform. The convention aimed to achieve equality of voice between the professional politicians and the ordinary citizens, utilizing principles like openness, fairness, efficiency, and collegiality. The success of this approach meant that the citizen members were more than capable of holding their own in discussions, and statistical analysis showed that the politicians did not significantly dominate the debates. The convention resulted in nearly 40 recommendations, leading most prominently to the successful 2015 referendum on marriage equality. The successful experience led the government to establish a subsequent pure sortition chamber, the 2016 to 18 Citizens Assembly. This essay examines the tensions inherent in implementing Gastil and Wright's bicameral model, using Belgium as a case study for evaluating public and political support. The authors agree that elections and sortition offer complementary virtues. For example, elections offer inclusive participation and accountability. Sortition offers impartiality and diversity. However, they focus on the competing legitimacies these two modes provide, arguing that if both chambers possess equal veto power, the relationship might become conflictual. Giving both chambers equal veto power, strong bicameralism increases the difficulty of overturning the status quo, which risks legislative deadlock. The difference in preferences between the elected body, partisan, less deliberative, and the sortition body, impartial, highly deliberative, could worsen this deadlock. Based on their empirical exploration in Belgium, the authors find that citizens tend to be more neutral or open to the idea of a sortition or mixed chamber, whereas political officials are generally strongly opposed. The authors explore alternatives to equal power, such as making the sortition chamber subordinate, consultative only, or subordinating the elected chamber, noting that each option has advantages and drawbacks related to political achievability and risk of elite intellectual domination. Andrea Felicetti and Donatella Della Porta analyzed the necessary relationship between the proposed sortition chamber and grassroots social movements, arguing that these two forces must collaborate to deepen democracy. The authors suggest that a positive relationship is not guaranteed, as tensions are bound to emerge between minipublics, which seek rational consensus, and movements which sometimes perceive deliberation as unsuitable for ideological or strategic reasons. Social movements are vital because they articulate critical perspectives that enrich public deliberation and strengthen the legitimacy of democratization efforts. Movements should serve as strategic partners in introducing and implementing the sortition chamber. The proposal must adopt a bottom-up campaign or demand-driven approach built in collaboration with activist enclaves to ensure activists support the chamber and perceive their input as consequential. They use case studies to illustrate interactions. Negative examples: the Australian Citizens Assembly on Climate Change CSEC proposal failed due to widespread opposition from social movements. Positive examples: deliberative polls on energy in Texas succeeded partly due to synergy with environmental movements. The Oregon Citizens Initiative Review (CIR) emerged from politically active grassroots communities and maintained credibility by addressing activist concerns. The Belgian G1000 was a national experiment born directly out of grassroots mobilizations in response to political impasse. The authors conclude that embedding the sortition chamber in public life and ensuring its independence and efficacy is essential to meet the democratic ambition of the public. Chapter 3, Democratic Principles. Tom Mallison compares an imaginary, well-functioning electoral body with proportional representation and strong campaign finance regulation with a similarly well-functioning sortition body. He uses a comprehensive scorecard to evaluate how each system fulfills key democratic values. Sortition performs better than elections in achieving descriptive representation, assembly demographically similar to the population, and in resisting the influence of money and wealthy interests. This is because the logic of elections inherently favors the wealthy and those with the resources to run successful campaigns. Popular control and accountability. Elections generally score better here because they offer a degree of blunt accountability through party platforms and the ability of voters to hold parties accountable for promises. While sortition offers a form of indicative control, representatives sharing the constituents' values or being like me, it lacks the disciplining function provided by elections. Deliberation and impartiality. Sortition would likely outperform elections. The inherent logic of electoral competition undermines good deliberation, leading to partisan posturing, scoring points, and focusing on short-term solutions. A sortition body, freed from partisan and electoral pressures, can aim for high-quality deliberation and impartiality, striving for consensus or fair compromises based on the force of the better argument. Competency. Elections score higher on competency. Mallison concludes that neither elections nor sortition alone can satisfy the full range of democratic values, suggesting that an optimal democratic system would need to combine both mechanisms, the bicameral model proposed by Gastil and Wright. This combination allows society to profit from both representation of actually existing interests from the elected chamber and representation of hypothetical post-deliberative interests from the sortition chamber. Jane Mansbridge provides a novel perspective on sortition's connection to citizens, focusing specifically on the accountability challenges when representatives are chosen by lot. She notes that while electoral representation involves accountability that is both sanction-based and deliberative, and formal and informal, representation by lot has a formal sanction-based quadrant that is relatively empty due to the absence of the electoral sanction. Mansbridge stresses the vital role of peer accountability, a mechanism consisting largely of informal and deliberative practices among the representatives themselves. This dynamic relies on mutual justification, communication, and informal sanctions, similar to how members of professions or university faculties hold each other accountable. Accountability to the public at large will primarily be formal and deliberative. This involves the assembly providing formal statements, such as written reports, that explain and justify their reasoning behind decisions, as exemplified by the statements produced by the Oregon Citizens Initiative Review Panel or the British Columbia Citizens Assembly Report. Lynn Carson stresses that a sortition assembly can succeed only if adequate attention is paid to its deliberative process. She focuses on achieving enlightened understanding, one of Robert Dahl's democratic principles. She cautions that the chamber must avoid replicating the adversarial nature of current parliaments, which prioritize debate persuasion, win-lose. Instead, genuine deliberation involves elements of both dialogue and debate, seeking consensus or common ground. Since deliberation is not innate but must be learned, proper design is imperative. Essential elements include skillful, independent, non-manipulative facilitation is essential to foster equal participation, build trust, and enable the group to find its own way without being directed. Mandatory orientation and training must enhance the citizens' capacity for critical thinking, allowing them to interrogate expert evidence and challenge their own personal biases, for example, confirmation bias. Voting should be the last resort because it can stop deliberation and entrench positions. Carson argues that the sortition assembly risks failing if it remains unconnected to the wider population, similar to current legislatures. She suggests extending deliberation beyond the legislature through tools like agenda-setting forums like the G1000 model and accountability forums where legislators face critical inquiry from randomly selected citizens. Dimitri Current examines sortition's distinctive qualities, revealing its non-obvious democratic virtues compared to other modes of selection election, nomination, certification. Sortition, for example, is argued to be an epistemically superior mode of selection due to the cognitive diversity it introduces to the assembly. Current organizes sortition's democratic potential around three core principles: equality. Sortition enacts equality through statistical equality. Each citizen has the same chance to be selected. Deliberative equality, all selected representatives are equals, suppressing superiority complexes. And inclusive equality, all citizens know they could be selected, emboldening wider participation. Impartiality. This is sortition's most obvious quality, rooted in the neutrality principle. Random selection helps prevent corruption and cronyism and promotes unity by removing artificial, pre-established partisan cleavages that impede honest debate. Representativeness. Sortition achieves representation by yielding a statistically accurate mirror representation of the population. It also fosters proximity between representatives and constituents as members share the same life and background as the represented. These principles result in a unique kind of legitimacy based on humility. Sortition produces representatives who are independent, not indebted to parties or financiers, and feel humble they were chosen by chance, not personal superiority, making their representative claim, "Nothing distinguishes me from you," more acceptable to the public. Arash Abizadeh extends the argument for the hybrid model by detailing the inherent limitations of elections and arguing why sortition must be paired with elections. Elections fail to secure responsiveness as representatives are not bound by promises, and the system favors the wealthy. They fail to treat people as political equals. Candidates are judged on superiority/eminence, not equality, and they fail to resolve conflicts impartially. Sortition addresses these flaws by enhancing responsiveness through descriptive representation that mirrors the population, resolving conflicts impartially, and treating people as political equals. Everyone has an equal prospect of selection. Abizadi argues that elections must be retained because they provide the crucial function of accountability through sanction. The threat of sanction, voters punishing poor performance, is indispensable as it incentivizes a two-way circulation of public justification and argument between the public and representatives. Elections also foster a necessary culture of mobilization and contestation that is vital for the health of democratic institutions. Analogy of democratic principles. One way to think about the different principles championed by elections and sortition is to imagine a ship being designed for a long, complex journey. Elections prioritize the engine, accountability, and the navigation equipment. Competency, they ensure the ship responds to commands and is guided by experienced hands. However, they struggle with the crew selection, equality, often resulting in officers chosen by wealth or celebrity, potentially ignoring the needs of the passengers, lack of descriptive representation. Sortition excels at crew selection, equality, and running the kitchen, deliberation/impartiality. The crew is a representative sample of all people, and decisions are made in a rational, unbiased way, focusing purely on what is best for the voyage. However, without elections, the ship lacks a clear sanctioning mechanism for poor performance and may struggle with overall competency in highly specialized areas, requiring the stabilizing presence of the elected chamber's experience and accountability loop. Chapter 4, Alternative Paths Towards Sortition. Devin Burks and Raphael Keyes advocate for a gradualist approach to implementing sortition, cautioning against the rapid institutionalization of a powerful sortition chamber. They believe that while the proposal for a sortition chamber has merit as a deliberative democratic reform, introducing it too quickly poses significant risks. They argue that a strong but unaccountable sortition device could undermine broader support for deliberative innovation because the public and policymakers are unprepared to accept it outright. Implementation would face resistance from citizens due to status quo bias, as systemic changes like this face higher obstacles than more modest reforms. Furthermore, citizens may find the complex concepts justifying sortition, like stratified random sampling and democratic legitimacy, without electoral accountability unsettling and unfamiliar. They also note resistance from decision makers, politicians who are likely to oppose a reform that would alter legislative institutions and require constitutional amendments. There is insufficient empirical evidence regarding the success of continuous empowered mini-publics, leading to uncertainty about internal accountability, professionalization, and visibility in a sortition chamber. A more gradual path involves first institutionalizing continuous, embedded consultative mini-publics at national or transnational levels. This intermediate step would normalize sortition as an efficient consultative method and build the public and political trust necessary for the more ambitious goal of establishing a sortition chamber. David Owen and Graham Smith are sympathetic to the goal of wider sortition use, but express skepticism about the viability of a full-function sortition legislature with multi-year terms, such as the one proposed by Gastil and Wright. Their central concern is that the proposed design would fail to adequately realize political equality and deliberative reasoning. They analyze precedents in Athenian democracy and contemporary deliberative mini-publics, finding that sortition's effectiveness is tied to other institutional devices. In Athens, sortition was consistently paired with rapid rotation of membership in offices after short periods of service, often limited to 1 year, and the sortition bodies primarily had responsive or scrutiny roles rather than broad agenda-setting powers. Gastil and Wright's proposal, with its long service and specialization, is unprecedented for a sortition body. This failure to include rotation exposes members to negative social and economic power, potentially leading to the concentration of power in a few committee members or skilled individuals, undermining political and deliberative equality. They contend that combining agenda setting and scrutiny functions in a single sortition body jeopardizes its democratic capacity. Agenda setting is likely to be vulnerable to powerful organized interests or devolve into competitive factionalism mimicking political parties, thereby sacrificing the deliberative difference sortition is meant to provide. They suggest an alternative design, a responsive sortition legislature built on a much wider pool of members, perhaps 6,000 citizens, inspired by Athens. This large pool would use sortition and more rapid rotation to assign members to issue-specific assemblies, focusing primarily on the scrutiny and reviewing of legislation. They believe this prudent approach offers a stronger basis for future democratic expansion than the original ambitious hybrid proposal. Brett Hennig, co-founder of the Sortition Foundation, challenges the necessity of retaining an elected chamber altogether, arguing that sortition alone can better achieve core democratic values. Hennig notes that historically, elections were associated with aristocracy or meritocracy, the principle of distinction, whereas sortition and rotation were associated with pure democracy and self-government until the mid-19th century. He argues that a sortition system, when paired with strong accountability mechanisms like civil liberties and judicial oversight, can have accountability that is as or more robust than elections. Sortition achieves legitimacy through the simulation claim. A representative microcosm of people will approximate what the entire community would decide under ideal deliberative conditions. Since a sortition body will likely be closer to this ideal than any elected body, it is inherently more legitimate. Retaining the elected chamber falls short of the democratic ideal and hinders the full potential of sortition. The elected chamber perpetuates partisan politics, horse trading, and adversarial zero-sum battles, which are undesirable modes of decision-making. Hennig supports a standalone sortition body as the ultimate goal, possibly using the bicameral hybrid proposed by Gastil and Wright as a stepping stone to prove the superior competence of sortition. He suggests that if current research on minipublics generalizes to legislative chambers, the public will have higher confidence in the sortition chamber, making the eventual elimination of the elected chamber easier. Terrell Beretius argues strongly against the hybrid bicameral model, contending that maintaining an elected chamber would sabotage the benefits of sortition and risk the delegitimization of the entire sortition chamber. He counters the supposed need for an elected chamber by questioning the benefits of political parties, which often create antagonism and ideological rigidity, and challenging the idea that elected officials are necessary as authorized negotiators for conflicting interests. In a hybrid system, the elected chamber would inevitably monopolize the public agenda, news, and attention. The sortition chamber would suffer a loss of active aptitude, the motivation for conscientious study and duty, as members defer to the high status, articulate elected politicians. This deference would short-circuit the wisdom and diversity of the allotted citizens. When the two chambers disagree, the elected chamber, relying on the principle of distinction and superior public speaking skills, would have a strategic incentive to undermine the legitimacy of the sortition chamber. Beretius warns that if sortition starts in a hybrid system, it may die there. Beretius proposes that sortition should eschew an all-purpose legislative chamber entirely. Instead, he envisions an interconnected network of multiple sortition bodies, multi-body sortition, each with a specific legislative function and topic. This approach addresses the competence and complexity problems of an all-purpose chamber. By peeling away issue areas one at a time and entrusting them to sortition bodies, this model provides a gradual, plausible path toward a virtually all-sortition lawmaking system. This approach includes agenda council, selected by lot to decide which issues need legislative attention, policy juries, large single-issue bodies that determine the final policy, rules and oversight councils, minipublics devoted to improving procedures and overseeing the staff. Chapter 5, Conclusion. The authors begin by acknowledging that their initial proposal for a sortition chamber, a randomly selected chamber co-equal to an elected chamber, is a radical departure from the status quo and tradition. They note that critics raised grave doubts that a sortition body with broad powers would fail, potentially leading to members becoming overwhelmed and welcoming administrative takeover by professional staff, following the lead of the same political parties running the elected chamber, falling prey to the enticements of special interests, becoming corrupt power brokers who are no better than the worst electoral counterparts due to a lack of electoral accountability. Critics generally suggested either drastically reducing the powers of sortition bodies, giving them specific subsidiary functions, or dismantling the centralized power of the state entirely, the anarchist option. Gastil and Wright reject the anarchist option because they believe modern democratic societies require a strong state capable of coherent action. They maintain that it is possible for sortition to be fully empowered and integrated into the heart of the machinery of the state, rather than serving only a subsidiary role. The chapter proceeds by revisiting three central issues, demonstrating how one can embrace radical possibilities while remaining attentive to risks. 1. The scope of a sortition body's authority. The authors initially envisioned a sortition body with broad authority analogous to existing legislative chambers. They emphasized the need for a sortition chamber with a broad remit because eschewing such an institution limits the capacity for empowered citizen deliberation to extend across the full breadth of public issues, leaving the largest priority-setting questions to the elected body. The authors stressed that moving from the existing reality of short, narrow minipublics to a full-bore sortition chamber would likely require an extended period of time with many intermediary stages. To address the wide scope of responsibility, they suggest compromises for transitional stages. A central sortition body could shape the agenda and convene provisional mini-publics that have the authority to render final decisions on specific legislation. The sortition body could be reactive, selecting among bills introduced in the elected chamber and possessing the power to amend and force votes on suppressed legislation. This takes advantage of the elected body's ability to draft complete laws while addressing its inability to move forward legislation suppressed by party leadership. They view the sortition chamber not as a replacement, but as a complement to other democratic institutions, including protests, elections, and mini-publics, arguing that their additive virtue outweighs the downsides of tension between elected and sortition bodies. 2. The transition toward a sortition legislature. The authors advocate for an incremental implementation that tests the efficacy and behavior of sortition legislators at each step. The evolution has already started. Existing experiments. The evolution can be seen in the Irish Constitutional Convention, which moved incrementally from an advisory hybrid body citizens and elected politicians to a citizen-only body. Intermediate paths. Other intermediate paths include those suggested by critics, such as empowered oversight boards on complex policy domains like criminal justice or healthcare, or bodies with agenda-setting authority to prioritize issues for legislative action. The final stage might involve gradually phasing out elected seats in a mixed member body. The ideal starting point for this stage is giving the sortition body authority over issues that pose the most serious conflicts of interest for elected bodies, such as amending election laws, setting legislative pay, and ethical self-policing. At every step, rigorous research must evaluate the capacity of citizen legislators. This evaluation should focus on whether they absorb key policy facts, demonstrate empathy toward disadvantaged social groups, recognize policy trade-offs, and formulate logical and well-evidenced rationales for their decisions. The authors conclude this theme by noting that an experimentalist approach means building the new institution over time in ways that may not be foreseeable at the outset. The challenge is ensuring initial forms of sortition evolve into a fuller implementation rather than becoming a permanent obstacle to it. 3. Contextual variations. The efficacy of any sortition reform depends heavily on the social setting, context dependency. The authors argue that design must adhere to democratic values, but remain flexible to recognize and respond to the specific challenges in any given social setting. The risk of corruption is severe, but the gravity of this problem and its remedies depend on the context. For example, corruption might be modest in a high-functioning municipality, but endemic in others. The more serious danger is that lay citizens are captured by elite economic interests or concentrated special interests, often through legal but unethical payoffs like future employment. The proposed remedy is that the sortition chamber must be capable of policing itself via an oversight board made up of current and former sortition members who lack the partisan entanglements typical of elected chambers. Recruitment challenges and the efficacy of safeguards compensation and legal protections also depend on the social structure. The most serious risk is not the non-participation of specialized privileged individuals whose interests can be expressed elsewhere, but rather the failure of safeguards to bring in the voices of disadvantaged groups who face substantial barriers to serving, like single parents with round-the-clock dependents,